Hey everyone, this is chapter 1 of Anton Pannekoek and the Socialism of Workers' Self-Emancipation. This is 1873 to 1960 by John Gerber. The chapter is titled The Making of a Socialist, the Milieu of Pannekoek's Marxism. First section, the historical context, society and social democracy in the Netherlands. The milieu in which Anton Pannekoek came to political maturity had a deep and profound effect in shaping both his initial political concerns and the character of his thought. This milieu was defined by the relative absence of an independent, mass-based, class-conscious working-class movement of any significant dimensions. Due to several features of Dutch socio-economic development, the context in which Dutch social democracy struggled to gain a foothold was markedly different from elsewhere in Western Europe. Among the most prominent factors shaping working-class political culture in the Netherlands was the structure of the Dutch economy itself. Until at least the first decade of the 20th century, labor-intensive agriculture remained the dominant sector of the economy. In the absence of coal and mineral resources, the Netherlands lacked the ingredients for the first phase of heavy industrialization. Compared to the rest of Western Europe, industrialization came relatively late, gaining momentum only in the last decades of the 19th century as an effect of the opening of the East Indies to private exploitation and the spillover of German economic growth. Even as it became irreversible, the process of industrialization and modernization developed only gradually and lagged far behind Great Britain, Belgium, and Germany. Factory production methods and technical and organizational innovations were accepted only slowly in a country characterized by a strong spirit of traditionalism and lethargy, which had its roots in the prolonged cultural and economic decline which began in the last quarter of the 17th century. Until well into the 20th century, the non-agricultural aspect of the Dutch economy was still dominated by the commercial and shipping legacy of an earlier era. Within the urban centers, the labor-intensive craft trades and small-scale retail sector predominated. Of those workers subject to impersonal wage structures, the overwhelming majority were employed in the transportation sector, predominantly as railway and dock workers. Lacking mineral resources, the Netherlands was unable to generate the mining, iron, and steel complexes found elsewhere in Western Europe. What little factory organization had existed of small productive units, what little factory organization that existed consisted of small productive units which were widely dispersed throughout the country. Only the complex of textile mills in the Twente district, or the Twente district, Twente, presented an exception to this pattern. As a consequence, the large and socially cohesive working-class concentrations common to the rest of Western Europe, which formed a base for socialist organization, were late in evolving. One moment. Looking for the notes, sorry. Footnote. The best accounts of the industrialization process in the Netherlands are J.A. de Jonge's, The Industrialisstatie in Nederland tussen 1850 and 1914, published in Amsterdam. I.G. Brugman's Per den Kracht in Mensenmarkt, Sociaal-economische Geschiedenis van Nederland, 1795 to 1940, published in 1961. Still useful is Henrietta Roland Host's classic work, Kapitaal en Arbeid in Nederland, Bedragen tot de economische Geschiedenis der, 19... I don't fucking know. Published in 1902. End footnote. The effects of these structural features were further intensified by the passive and demoralized character of the Dutch workforce. For over a century prior to the coming of industrialization, the underdeveloped nature of the economy and a subsistence-level poor law system combined to create a large class of semi-paupers. Long accustomed to poverty and being passive beneficiaries of paternalism, the Dutch working class was reluctant to attribute their misery to the emerging industrial capitalism, since they experienced neither the rupture of a pre-industrial way of life nor a contrast in material circumstances which might have served to inspire revolutionary resistance. An equally formidable barrier to the emergence of a class-conscious workforce was the historical division in Dutch society between Catholics and Calvinists. Far more than a simple religious division, this cleavage was expressed in separate and distinct subcultures with long-standing historic grievances which extended into every layer of Dutch society. The worker's religious cultural identification, which integrated him into a strong network of ecclesiastical and political organizations, was at least as important as social class as a factor in determining his social identity. Footnote: this ideological and cultural segmentation of Dutch society is covered by some book in Dutch. Johan Goodsblom, Dutch Society, published 1967. Don't see any description for that book. Arend Lipjaert, The Politics of Accommodation, Pluralism and Democracy in the Netherlands, published 1968. I don't see any good descriptions of this book either. End footnote. It was not surprising, then, that by the turn of the century, competing parallel trade union movements had developed in both the Catholic and Calvinist subcultures. Footnote: for an analysis of the effect of religion on the emergence of Dutch trade unions, see Eric Hansen and Peter A. Prosper Jr.'s article, Religion and the Development of the Dutch Trade Union Movement, 1872 to 1914, published in Social History, number 18, November 1976. End footnote. Lacking clear lines of identification, the Dutch working class was slow to develop independent organizations to further their class interest. Although trade unions first appeared in the 1860s, they were often weak and unstable organizations which had little impact on the development of the Dutch working class. A viable national labor federation did not develop until after the turn of the century. And there's some books in the footnote, but it just says a bunch of books in Dutch. In these circumstances, socialism took root in the Netherlands only slowly and painfully. Although a small and impotent Dutch section of the First International existed briefly in 1869, a national socialist organization was not formed until 1881, when three local socialist clubs joined to form the Social-Democratische Bond. Footnote: the most comprehensive history of the SDB is some book in Dutch by D.J. Wensink, or Vansink. And according to Dutch Wikipedia, the Social-Democratische Bond was the first party on a socialist basis in the Netherlands. The Social-Democratische Bond was founded in 1881 by Ferdinand Domela Nieuwenhuis. This former minister became the leader of the organization, which played a prominent role in the Dutch labor movement before the schisms between the socialist, anarchists, and communists in particular. In those years, there was no suffrage for men from middle and low-income classes. The SDB initially aimed mainly for universal suffrage. In the years 1883 to 1885, party members demonstrated along the route of the royal procession on Prince's Day. After Prince's Day 1885, attention was shifted to the social struggle of the trade union movement. The union was revolutionary in the sense that it wanted to bring about changes in the Netherlands through a revolution. Nevertheless, it participated in elections, and thus Domela Nieuwenhuis entered the House of Representatives in 1888. After a judicial investigation, the SDB was declared a banned organization in mid-1894. The question of method of struggle led to a split later that year. In August 1894, several leading socialists founded the SDAP, which converted to parliamentarism. In December, a new organization was founded by the representatives of the former SDB branches under the name Socialistenbond. Back to the text. From its inception, the Social-Democratische Bond was dominated by the charismatic and powerful figure of Domela Nieuwenhuis. Now I'm going to read the Dutch Wikipedia for Ferdinand Domela Nieuwenhuis. I think it's how you say it. Nieuwenhuis. It might even be the Newhouse. Dutch to English.
Ferdinand Domela Nieuwenhuis.
Newhouse. Okay, yeah, it's Newhouse. Ferdinand Domela Nieuwenhuis.
Ferdinand Domela Nieuwenhuis.
Ferdinand Domela Nieuwenhuis. Lived from 1846 to 1919 and was a Dutch socialist politician and later a social anarchist and anti-militarist. Domela Nieuwenhuis is considered one of the founders of the socialist movement in the Netherlands. In 1879, Domela Nieuwenhuis founded the magazine Recht voor Allen. Later in 1898, he founded the magazine De Vrije Socialist. Ferdinand Domela Nieuwenhuis's original name was Nieuwenhuis, but in 1859 his family received permission by royal decree to add the surname Domela, so the family name henceforth became Domela Nieuwenhuis. Ferdinand Domela Nieuwenhuis was the son of Ferdinand Jacob Domela Nieuwenhuis, Lutheran minister and professor of theology, and Henrietta Frances Berry. When Ferdinand Domela Nieuwenhuis was 10 years old, his mother died. Ferdinand Domela Nieuwenhuis, his father, remarried Marie Antoinette Meyer, who practiced painting and further educated him. His brother was the art collector A.J. Domela Nieuwenhuis. Ferdinand married 4 times, each time to a woman named Johanna. That's weird as fuck. 3 of the wives died in childbirth. In 1870, he married Johanna Lolofs, 1847 to 1872, with whom he had 2 sons. Ferdinand Nieuwenhuis, Domela Nieuwenhuis, remarried in 1874 to Johanna Adriana Verhagen, who lived from 1842 to 1877, and with whom he had daughters and a son who died at a very young age. He remarried in 1880 to Johanna Frederica Schingenhagen, 1843 to 1884, with whom he had a son. Ferdinand Domela Nieuwenhuis remarried in 1891 to Johanna Egberta Gotthelp, who lived from 1863 to 1933, with whom he had a daughter and 2 sons, including the later painter Caesar Domela Nieuwenhuis. In 1870, Domela Nieuwenhuis was appointed minister in the Lutheran Church in Harlingen. There, Domela Nieuwenhuis founded a branch of the Peace League because of the Franco-German War. In 1872, Domela Nieuwenhuis wrote 2 articles in De Gids about the peace movement. Domela Nieuwenhuis supported the workers who asked for a wage increase. Domela Nieuwenhuis then worked as a minister in Beverwijk and The Hague, but with increasing reluctance. Domela Nieuwenhuis' first and second wives died during that time, which made him increasingly doubt the existence of an almighty God. The work of liberal theologians such as Ernest Renan and David Friedrich Strauss strengthened his doubts. Ernest Renan, I know most famously because he was like one of the most well-known theorists of nationalism in a non-critical way, to my understanding. And David Friedrich Strauss was part of the young Hegelian movement, of which Marx was a part of, and departed from. But David Friedrich Strauss tried to write like a secular biography of Jesus Christ, I believe. DeMille Newhouse went to Germany in 1875 to study the social problem there, and he was interested in social work. During DeMille Newhouse's function as a minister, he came into contact with social problems through the conversations he had with the members of his congregation. During this period, Ferdinand DeMille Newhouse lost his belief in a personal God and became a pantheist. Ferdinand DeMille Newhouse then became an atheist. On September 1st, 1879, he resigned his office as minister in The Hague. Thanks to an inheritance in 1879, DeMille Newhouse gained financial independence. Some opponents would use this against him a few years later by counting him among the capitalists. DeMille Newhouse acquired a great deal of theoretical knowledge to the ideas of Proudhon, Marx, and Engels. DeMille Newhouse converted to socialism. DeMille Newhouse traveled the country to give lectures on social issues, and one of DeMille Newhouse's first speeches was at the Algemeen Nederlandsch Werklieden Verbond. After the lecture, DeMille Newhouse got into conversation with the chairman, Willem Aanzing, who convinced him to become a member. In his lectures, he, quote, preached against the 5 Ks, church, king, capital, barracks, and pub. DeMille Newhouse worked as an editor for the socialist magazine Recht voor Allen, a magazine he had co-founded. DeMille Newhouse became a member of the Freethinkers Association, de Dageraad. In 1879, DeMille Newhouse gave a lecture for the Social Democratic Association. After the Social Democratic Association merged into the Social Democratic Party, usually referred to as the Social Democratic League, they had elected DeMille Newhouse as secretary. DeMille Newhouse advocated equal rights for men and women, total abstinence, and the introduction of universal suffrage. Although he was mediocre as a writer, DeMille Newhouse must have been a fascinating and engaging speaker. DeMille Newhouse made a great impression on the farm workers and farmers in Friesland and Groningen. DeMille Newhouse was often compared to Jesus, quote, our Redeemer, end quote. The Frisian farm workers called him. DeMille Newhouse himself encouraged that image. By growing hair and beard, he made a prophetic impression, and he peppered his speeches with biblical images, which must have appealed greatly to his audience. DeMille Newhouse co-founded the League for Universal Suffrage in 1882, which is often conveniently called the Electoral League. The Electoral League was a collaboration of socialist and social liberal advocates of universal suffrage. At that time, only 1/8 of adult men were allowed to vote. In 1883, on Budget Day, a large demonstration for universal suffrage was held by the Electoral League. The demonstrators stood along the route of the royal procession, and at one point let a large number of ribbons with protest slogans descend onto the carriage. On the 15th of September 1884, DeMille Newhouse, together with representatives of the Electoral Union, presented a petition to Prime Minister Jan Heemskerk. The Prime Minister rejected the petition demand for universal suffrage. Under pressure from the suffrage movement, the right to vote was extended in 1887, allowing approximately 1/7 of adult males to vote. On Budget Day in 1885, the largest demonstration in the history of the Electoral Union was organized. Once again, a petition was drawn up and presented to the government. On the 24th of April, 1886, the critical article, The King is Coming, was published in Recht voor Allen. In this article, King William III was characterized as, quote, someone who makes so little of his job, end quote. Although Domela Newhouse was not the author of the article, Domela Newhouse, as editor-in-chief, did take final responsibility for the article. The inclusion of 10 blank pages presenting the king's activities was also completely rejected. He received many expressions of support. The liberal Sam van Houten acted as his lawyer and unsuccessfully litigated all the way to the Supreme Court. In 1887, Domela Newhouse was sentenced to a year in Utrecht prison for lèse-majesté. I don't know what the hell that means. A deliberate insult of the head of state. At that time, it was ensured that political prisoners were treated differently from non-political prisoners. While people spoke of compulsory prison labor as gluing bags, Domela Newhouse did a slightly better job of folding boxes. Upon his early discharge, when Domela Newhouse was granted a pardon after several months, Domela Newhouse received a used suit from the director as a gift. He then moved to the Malacca Hofje in The Hague. The Frisian People's Party, VFP, nominated Newhouse as a candidate for the 1888 Second Chamber elections in the Frisian constituency of Schoterland. The FVP was a collaboration between the Frisian branches of the Electoral Union and the SDB. The Frisian People's Party had approximately 5,000 members. Domela Newhouse received 31.6% of the votes, which is more than the anti-revolutionary candidate, and thus he reached the second round. His opponent was Bernardus Hermanus, chairman of the General Dutch Workers' Union and candidate on behalf of the Liberal Electoral Association. The elections of that year were dominated by the opposition between liberals and, for the first time, cooperating confessionals. In the heat of the battle, the Reformed Daily Standard, their standard, through its leader, Abraham Kuyper, discouraged voters in Schoterland from voting for the Liberal, and thus Domela Newhouse entered Parliament completely unexpectedly. On the 14th of May, 1888, Domela Newhouse gave his first parliamentary speech in which he advocated a ban on forced shopping, or truck system, is the obligation to make purchases from a particular supplier. Forced shopping means that employees are forced by their employers to buy their necessary items only in a specific store. The employees would be fired if they refused to buy only at their boss's store. The prices in these stores were very high. The government refused to do anything about forced shopping. Because Domela Newhouse was able to formulate and write down all sorts of things, in Recht voor Allen, socialism gained popularity in the Netherlands. Domela Newhouse attended the congresses of the Second International, where Domela Newhouse advocated, among other things, a general strike in the event of war. In 1891, Domela Newhouse reluctantly stood for re-election. Just before the elections of 1891, Domela Newhouse wrote the pamphlet Vier Jaren Klaasregering of wat men met algemeen kiesrecht hebben kunnen doen hebben. 4 years of class government, or what one could have done with universal suffrage, which was distributed in hundreds of thousands of copies. In this pamphlet, Domela Newhouse gave a list of proposals he had made and which had been rejected. According to Domela Newhouse, these proposals would have been adopted in the case of universal suffrage. A few examples are ban on forced shopping, introduction of the 8-hour working day, introduction of the minimum wage, ban on work for children under the age of 15, free education, establishment of health insurance funds and pension funds, compensation for industrial accidents, reduction of indirect taxes, ending the Acre War, independence for the colonies, nationalism of the railways, and the abolition of tolls on national roads. Ferdinand Domela Newhouse lost the elections of 1891. The liberal jurist Troib was prepared to give up his seat to him, but Domela Newhouse did not want to owe his seat to a liberal and refused. The historian Jan Willem Stutje states that Duhamel Neuhaus also used anti-Jewish characterizations in his polemics, especially in his conflict with Peter Jellis Troelstra, who, unlike Duhamel, was parliamentary-oriented. Troelstra had a certain following among the Jewish diamond workers. According to Stutje, this gave Duhamel calls for anti-Jewish expressions. After Troelstra separated from the Social Democratic League in 1894, and the break had become a fact, this decreased and there were only occasional outbursts. Duhamel Neuhaus felt increasingly attracted to anarchism and revolution. Initially, the SDB supported Duhamel Neuhaus in this, the Congress of 1892 even adopting a resolution, quote, that for the proletariat lasting improvement on the basis of the present society is not possible, end quote. The goal became, quote, revolution and overthrow of the existing social order with all legal and illegal means, end quote. The latter led to the banning of the SDB as an association, after which the union split in 1894 into the SDAP, the Socialist Bund. Duhamel Neuhaus became a member of the latter, but soon the goals did not go far enough for Duhamel Neuhaus, and in 1898, Duhamel Neuhaus canceled his membership. Duhamel Neuhaus turned away from parliamentary democracy and became an anarchist. After 1898, Duhamel devoted a lot of his time to editorial work for Die Vrije Socialist. In 1903, Duhamel Neuhaus moved to Het Gooi and devoted himself to his publicist work. He wrote many historical books, including several biographies. In 1903, he made the first Dutch translation of Utopia, Thomas More's story about an ideal society on a socialist basis. In 1904, together with Nico Schermerhorn, he co-founded the International Anti-Militarist Association. In 1910, he published his memoirs, Van Christen tot Anarchist, which I'm assuming means from Christian to anarchist, but I'm not sure. After Neuhaus died in Hilversum at the age of 72 in late 1919, he was one of the first to be cremated and buried at Westerveld in Velsen. Duhamel Neuhaus's funeral procession, in which 12,000 sympathizers participated, passed through Amsterdam. In 1931, his statue, made by Johan Paulet, was unveiled in Amsterdam. It stands at Nassauplein in Amsterdam West next to Westerpark. Nearby is also the Duhamel Neuhaus Pension, named after him. Which is a park. On October 28, 2014, the small square in Hilversum where he lived has remained Duhamel Neuhausplein. The house is a municipal monument. Duhamel Neuhaus was popular in the Netherlands for his performance at strikes of craftsmen, but also at those of peat workers. A photo of Duhamel Neuhaus could be found in many workers' homes. Because he stood up for the Frisian peat workers in his life, he was given the nickname Us Verloser. In Herenveen, you can find the Duhamel Neuhaus Museum, part of the Museum Herenveen. Duhamel Neuhaus was very much against the excessive alcohol consumption of the workers. The statement he liked to use, quote, thinking workers do not drink, drinking workers do not think, end quote, is originally from Geert Lorenz van der Zwaag. And there are some other quotes from him. Quote, to derive a divine world from the concrete world is a somersault, end quote. Quote, if only half the effort and care now spent in earning money and accumulating wealth were used for the good of mankind, ways would be found for the realization of the good and the beautiful and the true, end quote. Quote, it should be noted that tyrants do not make slaves, but on the contrary, slaves make tyrants. If a people is servile and obsequious, then tyranny arises. It is not servile. If it is not servile, then there is no room for tyranny, end quote. Quote, minorities have always been the driving force throughout history, end quote. Quote, it is of no importance to the workers whether they are slaves of the capitalists or of the state, end quote. Quote, there is blood on every object we take into our hands, and that blood cries out to heaven because it is the blood of men, end quote. Quote, those Kafirs are so lazy, said the Christian-minded Boers, and they laid the whip on the black backs of the natives, who was certainly not blessed the day on which they came into contact with the whites, end quote. Quote, it is quite conceivable that one will obtain a communist dictatorship which will see to it that the needs of the stomach are met, but which will by no means grant freedom to all. Therefore, the struggle must now be waged not only against private property, but also against authority, end quote. Quote, is it not strange that a girl should be called, quote, dishonored if she has slept with a man of her choice without the permission of the mayor or a note from the registry office? Or that a woman, if she, although married, has slept with the man she loves, rather than with her lawful husband, into whose arms she has thrown herself, who knows for what reason, as if it were not much more dishonorable to sleep with a, quote, lawful man, for whom one feels aversion, even disgust, end quote. Quote, Oscar Wilde, the unfortunate English poet, who has been so severely maltreated for an aberration of nature, which in our narrow moral world is regarded as a crime, ... end quote. Quote, the reception I received in the chamber confirms the assertion of Multatuli and Roorda van Eisinga that there is no more disgusting parliament in the entire civilized world than the Dutch one, end quote. All right, so thank you for allowing me that detour into Ferdinand de Mello Newhouse's biography. This is an extreme. I mean, I don't know what's going to be said in the rest of the book, but I know enough about the history of, say, the Dutch-German communist left to know that de Mello Newhouse was an extremely important figure. And you can only guess that some of these more libertarian statements had some kind of influence on the development of Pannekoek's Marxism, as well as the Marxism of the more libertarian-oriented communists that were to merge from the same milieu. Anyway, back to the text. A former Lutheran pastor, Newhouse had developed a sympathy for the poor while preaching in the province of Friesland, the most backward and underdeveloped province in the Netherlands during the 1870s. In 1879, he left the church and founded the socialist newspaper Recht voor Allen, which translates to right for all. And Dutch Wikipedia says Justice for All, or Recht voor Allen, was a Dutch social democratic magazine, initially independent of any political party, later the organ of the Social Democratic League. It was published from the 1st of March 1879 to 1900. The responsible publisher was the social democrat and later anarchist Ferdinand de Mello Newhouse. Justice for All was distributed through street canvassing and had a circulation of 300,000 copies at Justice for All's peak. Originally, Justice for All appeared once a week, from 1885 twice, and from 1887 3 times. In the period of 1888 to 1891, Recht voor Allen was a daily newspaper, after which its publication dropped to 3 times, and from 1898 to twice a week. From 1892 onwards, Christian Cornelissen was added to the editorial staff of Recht voor Allen. From that moment on, de Mello Newhouse and Cornelissen jointly led the editorial staff, which went well despite their differences in views. I think Christian Cornelissen is an anarchist. It says Christian Cornelissen was a Dutch activist, writer, libertarian, syndicalist, Marxist, and anarchist. In 1867, quote, a documentary about the emerging socialism in the 1880s based on Recht voor Allen, end quote, was released under the title Hop, 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 Hang Up the Socialists. The title refers to one of the slogans that the canvassers of Recht voor Allen occasionally had thrown at their heads. Let's see if that video is on YouTube real quick. I'm not seeing it. Back to the text. The Wikipedia is over with. Although Newhouse corresponded with both Marx and Engels and translated an abridged version of Marx's Capital, Newhouse was never a Marxist. At the outset, Newhouse was hardly more than a humanitarian social reformer whose eclectic writings and speeches combined ideas of an ethical utopian and eschatological character. During the early years of its existence, the SDB devoted most of its efforts to waging a militant agitational campaign for universal suffrage. This tactic, however, succeeded only in arousing the fears of the authorities, who launched a campaign of repression against the SDB, which culminated in the arrest and imprisonment of Newhouse in 1886. Defeated in its efforts to achieve suffrage reform and decimated by government repression, the SDB began to increasingly question its commitment to parliamentary tactics. This mood was reinforced by Newhouse's own bitter and solitary experiences in Parliament after his election from a Friesland constituency in 1888. Ostracized by his bourgeois opponents, Newhouse began to move closer and closer to anarchism. After his defeat in 1891, he repudiated parliamentarism altogether and declared that only revolutionary action could emancipate the working class. While Domela Newhouse was reassessing his commitment to parliamentary tactics, a new tendency began to emerge within the SDB, which favored a Marxist party based on the German model. Two individuals played a key role in shaping this movement, Frank van der Goes and Peter Jellis Troelstra. How do you pronounce that?
Frank van der Goes. Frank van der Goes.
Frank van der Goes. It looks like Frank van der Goes. Frank
van der Goes. Frank van der Goes.
Van der Goes. Frank van der Goes. Wikipedia says, or Dutch Wikipedia says, Frank van der Goes lived from 1859 to 1939, was a Dutch journalist, Marxist theoretician, and one of the founders of the SDAP. Frank van der Goes spelled his first name as Frank, which was called Goes, and used the pseudonym D.H. Mr. FPVK and P.H. Hock van Oisden. Anyway, van der Goes was the son of an insurer, Willem van der Goes, and Johanna Knoop Koopsman. At the HBS, he met the poet Jacques Perk. Van der Goes trained as an insurer and was active for several years at the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, but his interest lay mainly in literature and politics. In 1881, van der Goes was one of the founders of the literary society Flanor, but he resigned on the 13th of January 1882 because his proposal to pay tribute to Multatuli was not supported. In 1885, van der Goes was at the cradle of De Nieuwe Gids, the literary magazine of the Tachtigers. In 1886, he wrote Majesteit Schennis in response to a conviction of Ferdinand Domela Newhouse. This led to his temporary banishment from the stock exchange. In 1892, he definitely stopped his stock exchange activities after he had made himself impossible in the eyes of his colleagues with a fierce political speech, which also cost him his part-time job as a teacher of declamation at the Amsterdam Theatre School and the Amsterdam Conservatory. In 1893, Frank van der Hoos, together with most of the other editors, canceled all cooperation with De Nieuwe Gids, leaving the magazine to Willem Kloos, whose aversion to any form of political position had caused the split. In 1894, he was, together with Peter Jellis Troelstra and Hendrik Speakman, one of the, quote, 12 apostles of the SDAP, end quote, who founded the Social Democratic Workers' Party. He left a strong mark on the party program, but was not elected to the board, according to some because he behaved too formally, quote, gentlemanly, for that. He contributed to Die Chroniek by Peter Lodewijk Tak, and in 1896 he was co-founder of Die Nieuwe Tid. From 1899 to 1912, Van der Hoos was also a private lecturer in political economy at the Amsterdam Municipal University. Later, Frank van der Hoos became editor of Het Volk, 1912 to 1925. He translated Das Kapital by Karl Marx into Dutch together with Martis Treibels, Part 1, and Anton Pannekoek, Part 2. Frank van der Hoos's political career was very eventful. In 1932, van der Hoos left the SDAP, which he felt had slid too far to the right. He joined the Independent Socialist Party founded by Piet J. Schmidt and Jacques Descartes, and edited the party magazine Die Fakkel. In 1935, the LSP merged with the Revolutionary Socialist Party of Hank Snevely to form the Revolutionary Socialist Workers' Party. Frank van der Hoos soon left this latter party, which he found too Trotskyist. Frank van der Hoos subsequently became one of the founders of the League of Revolutionary Socialists. He became a member of the editorial board of the BRS magazine, The Socialist. Shortly before his death, on his 80th birthday, in 1939, he was presented with the anthology Uit het werk van Frank van der Hoos, with a preface by Henriette Rolandhulst. On the 2nd of March 1893, Frank van der Hoos married Maria Coens. They had 4 daughters. And let's look up Peter Jellis Troelstra.
Pieter Jellis Troelstra. Pieter Jellis Troelstra.
Peter Jellis Troelstra.
Pieter Jellis Troelstra. Pieter Jellis Troelstra.
I don't know if I'm saying it right, but Peter Jellis Troelstra. I don't know. It sounded like they were saying Tolstra, where there's an R in it, so it's like Troelstra. I'm not sure. And who's to say this thing is even correct? In Dutch Wikipedia says, Peter Jellis Troelstra lived from 1860 to 1930 and was a Dutch poet, lawyer, journalist, and politician. Peter Jellis Troelstra became known as the socialist leader who, following the revolution in Germany, wanted to proclaim the socialist revolution in the Netherlands in November 1918. In addition, Troelstra became well known in Friesland as a Frisian writer and poet. Peter Jellis Troelstra, even after his temporary departure from Friesland, always used his Frisian patronymic Jellis. In his literary works, he often wrote his name in Frisian as Pieter Jellis. About his youth, we know almost exclusively what he wrote about it in his later memoirs. The multi-volume Gedenkschriften. Troelstra grew up in the Frisian town of Steens. His father was a convinced liberal, and Dutch was spoken at home. During his second school year, Troelstra developed into a fierce fighter and organizer and a man of letters who championed the use of the Frisian language. Peter Jellis Troelstra came into contact with writers such as Jesus Christ, Tisjaling, Halbertsma, and Ono Siertstra. With the latter, he edited the poetry collection Het Jonge Friesland in 1881. With U Bella Stellingwerf, he set up the theater company Gisbert Japix. From 1882 to 1888, Troelstra studied law in Groningen. Here he also attended history classes with Petrus Johannes Bloch. He continued his literary activities. He was one of the editorial board of the literary magazine For House and Yard and of the Nie Frisk Liedboek, which appeared in 1886. As a student, Troelstra was an active member and secretary of the Groningen Student Almanac of 1884 and assessor primus of the Senate of the Groningen Student Corps Vindicat Atk Palit in 1887. Later, Troelstra developed more of it as a political fighter, both in the Frisian movement and in the socialist one. He became a member of the Social Democratic League of Demille Nieuwhuis, from which he would later split to found the SDAP. In 1888, Troelstra married Sjoekja Maria Derica Bokma de Boer, who became known as a children's book writer under the pseudonym Nienke van Hichtem. They had two children, Divuke and Jelle Troelstra. After his studies, Peter Jellis Troelstra established himself as a lawyer in Leeuwarden. He became a member of the Frisian People's Party in 1890, but after a long struggle decided to devote his time entirely to the socialist movement. In 1892, Regent Emma and 12-year-old Queen Wilhelmina visited Leeuwarden. When the socialists demonstrated against the visit, anti-socialist riots broke out. Troelstra stood up for party members whose homes had been plundered by monarchists. Troelstra moved to Amsterdam in 1893. The following year, he helped found the Socialist Democratic Workers' Party, SDAP, and in 1897 he entered the House of Representatives for the Tiet Yerkes Teradale constituency. Then he showed himself to be a convinced anti-monarchist. Peter Jellis Troelstra refused to attend the opening of the States General on Budget Day and instead organized demonstrations in The Hague. Not only in the chamber, but also as the lawyer of Huggerhuis brothers, Troelstra gained fame through the Netherlands after 1897. The political trial against the three brothers accused of robbery who always maintained their innocence received a lot of attention at the time. When the party founded the daily newspaper Het Volk in 1900 with financial support from the German sister party SPD, Troelstra became editor-in-chief. Already in 1903, the party board replaced him with the journalist Peter Ludovic Tak. In the elections of 1901, the SDAP jumped from 2 to 6 seats, but Troelstra was defeated in his own constituency, Tietjerksk Teradeel, by the AR Reverend Talma. In a by-election in the district of Amsterdam, Peter Jellis returned to the House, to remain there until 1925. Troelstra once compared the state of affairs in the House of Representatives with the already disused part of the initiation in Groningen, the Actus. However, speaking about this in public was strictly forbidden. The secret of the Actus had to remain between the patronus and the first-year student and the Senate forever. Because he violated this ban, he was expelled as a reunionist by the Groningen Student Corps. Troelstra hoped that the monarchy would die out with Wilhelmina. It looked as if Queen Wilhelmina and Prince Hendrik would remain childless when Prime Minister Heemskerk read a medical certificate in the House on the 22nd of December 1908 about the expected birth of an heir to the throne. The Speaker of the House expressed congratulations that were followed by loud cheers. Troelstra took the floor to explain that congratulations had not been expressed on behalf of all members. Disapproval was his share. The expected victory in the elections of that year also failed to materialize. Troelstra began to devote himself to literature again. In the same year, he published his famous collection of poems, Rispinga Harvest, a collection that stood out in a time of moralizing poetry because of the openness and personal character of the poems. The marriage between Peter Jellis Troelstra and Sjoukje Bokma der Boer ended in divorce and was officially dissolved in 1907, after which Troelstra married again to Sjoukje Oosterboom. There was also a divorce in the party. The left wing with luminaries such as Frank van der Hoos, Herman Gorter, David Wynkoop, and Henriette Roland Host left the SDAP in 1909. This split would later lead to the foundation of the Communist Party of the Netherlands, a formidable competitor of the Socialists from 1918 onward. The 1913 elections finally brought a breakthrough for the SDAP. The party jumped from 7 to 18 seats. This victory created a huge dilemma, to govern or not. On the 5th of July, Troelstra traveled to Apeldoorn to give his political advice to Queen Wilhelmina at Tetlu Palace. That advice was, a cabinet must be formed from the civil parties. With that, Troelstra broke through the, quote, antithesis of Abraham Kuyper, according to which for decades the left-wing liberals or the right-wing Christian parties had governed. Troelstra's advice was well received by the Queen, but the, quote, bourgeois parties would not hear of it. The Liberal Democrat Dirk Bos was ordered to form a cabinet from the left, which for the cooperation of the Socialists was indispensable. Together with the parties of the liberal concentration, they had 52 of the 100 seats. Within the party, Jan Scheper and Willem Vliegen were in favor of participation in a Bos government. Troelstra was against. On the 19th of July, he won the argument in a joint meeting of the faction and party board with 13 votes to 8. Participation in government by the SDAP would have to wait until 1939. After the outbreak of the Russian Revolution, Troelstra saw his chance and called on the Dutch population for a socialist revolution in 1918. This failed, and his call went down in history as Troelstra's mistake. It was a great disappointment to him. Troelstra gradually began to withdraw from politics. In the last years of his life, he wrote his memoirs in Dutch under the title Gedenkschriften. The NVV and the SDAP organized a quote, demonstrative Congress on the 19th of September 1925 to bid farewell to their leader. The commemorative plaque issued on that occasion is shown below. In 1925, the NVV decided to build the Troelstra Oord near Beekbergen on the Veluwe, a holiday and study resort for workers, which also served as a monument to Troelstra. The building was opened in 1927. In 1955, the main building burned down. It was later rebuilt, and the complex was given the function of a commercial hotel. The parts of the original complex that are preserved are considered a municipal monument. Peter Jellis Troelstra died at the age of 70. His funeral on the 16th of May 1930 attracted between 35,000 and 40,000 visitors. The most common reading of the history of Troelstra's failed revolution is that the Netherlands was not ready for a socialist revolution. However, the VPRO history program Andrea Kiedian broadcast a reconstruction on the 20th of September 2005, which would show that Troelstra's own hesitation and not the unwillingness of the people prevented the revolution. Okay, so thank you for letting me look those people up. A gifted literary intellectual, back to the text, a gifted literary intellectual of his aristocratic temperament, Frank der Hoos was motivated by an almost aesthetic sense of social idealism. Throughout much of the 1880s, Frank van der Hoos was active as a social reformer and prominent member of the Liberal Party, but by the late 1880s, Frank van der Hoos became convinced that only socialism could revitalize Dutch society. Upon joining the SDB in 1890, Frank van der Hoos embarked upon a systematic study of German Marxism and swiftly emerged as the leading intellectual proponent of Marxian socialism in the Netherlands. Through his countless articles, translations, and personal contacts, van der Hoos was almost single-handedly responsible for introducing a whole generation of Dutch intellectuals and militants to Marxism. Footnote. Despite his importance both for the formation of Marxian socialism in the Netherlands and late 19th century Dutch intellectual and cultural life, Frank van der Hoos still awaits a biographer. End footnote. Although far less knowledgeable than van der Hoos in theoretical matters, Peter Jelles Troelstra complemented him well by virtue of his superior abilities as an agitator and organizer. Troelstra began his career as a young lawyer in Friesland, where his work defending impoverished agricultural laborers eventually led him to socialism. Although far less knowledgeable than van der Hoos, Troelstra's first activity as a socialist, however, was in the People's Party of Friesland, which has been described as a, quote, curious amalgamation of socialist populists and proponents of land nationalization, a movement half and sometimes entirely bourgeois, end quote. Troelstra initially tried and failed to transform the People's Party into a social democratic party. In 1891, he joined the SDB, where he was introduced to Marxist theory by van der Hoos. I'm not seeing any good descriptions for this. One second. Yeah, I'm not seeing any good. Dutch Wikipedia says the Frisian People's Party was a federation of members and branches of the Social Democratic League, the League for General Suffrage, and the General Dutch Workers' Union that existed in 1886 to about 1900 in Friesland. The Frisian People's Party was a fairly broad movement of all kinds of radicals at that time from various backgrounds. As a party, the movement was quite successful. With its support, Ferdinand de Nieuwhouse was elected to the House of Representatives. The party won a seat in the provincial states of Friesland and became the largest party in the municipal council of Amsterdam, providing 2 aldermen there. The decline of the movement came when the Social Democratic League took a revolutionary and anti-parliamentary course, and the other side of the SDAP was founded. This party was less broad, but eventually many former members of the Friese Volksparty joined the SDAP. End footnote. I'm assuming you're back to the text. Troelstra initially tried and failed to transform the People's Party into a social democratic party. In 1891, Troelstra joined the SDB, where he was introduced to Marxist theory by Frank van der Hoos. Van der Hoos and Troelstra first clashed openly with Nieuwhouse at the 1891 SDB Congress of Amsterdam over the question of parliamentarianism. Thoroughly chastised, they began to organize a pro-parliamentary and Marxist faction within the SDB. Organization and financial support for their efforts was soon forthcoming from the German Social Democrats and from Henry Pollack and the predominantly Jewish General Dutch Miner Diamond Workers Federation, which at that time was the largest and most cohesive trade union in the country. One second, trying to look this person up. Sorry. Wikipedia says Henry Pollack lived from 1868 to 1943 and was one of the most prominent Dutch trade union leaders from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and also a prominent social democratic politician. And the General Dutch Diamond Workers Union was by far the most important trade union of the many Jewish diamond workers in Amsterdam. The union was founded in 1894 by Henry Pollack, who lived from 1868 to 1943, and Jan van Zutphen, who lived from 1863 to 1958, among others. Its glory years were in the period up to the First World War, which was also the greatest heyday of the diamond industry in Amsterdam. The General Dutch Diamond Workers Union was the first large, well-organized trade union in the Netherlands. For a time, the General Dutch Diamond Workers Union For a time, it was even the largest union in the entire country. The approach and organizational style of this new type of trade union, therefore, had a major influence on the, quote, modern trade union movement that emerged in the Netherlands around 1900, and on the course of the Dutch Federation of Trade Unions, NVV, founded in 1905, the forerunner of the current FNV. Back to the text. Footnote. Sorry, I have to get back to the notes. And there's nothing even at the footnote that I need to read. End footnote. A crucial turning point came when the 1893 Congress of Groningen overwhelmingly rejected all forms of electoral activity and expelled Van der Hoos. At this point, a major dispute developed between Troelstra and Van der Hoos. Troelstra, less firmly committed to the German model of socialism, felt that a split should be avoided. Van der Hoos, however, favored the formation of a completely new Marxist party and set up several local organizing committees. On August 24th, 1894, these groups met to form the Social-Democratische Arbeiderspartij, SDAP, Social Democratic Labor Party. Its program, drawn up by Van der Hoos, was largely a carbon copy of the 1891 German Erfurt program. Dutch Wikipedia says, the Social Democratic Workers' Party, SDAP, was a social democratic Dutch political party that existed from 1894 to 1946. The party emerged from a split within the Social Democratic League and eventually became part of the Labour Party. The SDAP was founded on the 26th of August 1894 in Trum Atlas at Ozenmarkt 9 in Zwolle by members of the Social Democratische Bond of Ferdinand de Melle Nieuwhuis, and the 12 founders, called the 12 Apostles, included Pieter Jellis Troelstra, Jan Schaper, and Willem Vliegen. The reason for the split was a motion adopted in response to de Melle's poor treatment in the lower house, never to participate in elections again, not even as a means of agitation. The SDAP members did not want to lose this means in the revolutionary struggle. In 1897, the Social Democrats won 2 seats in the lower house for the first time. Parliamentary work soon became the party's main activity. The party joined the Second International, the umbrella organization of socialist parties in Europe. The starting point was a social democratic striving for a socialist society. It was a democratic striving for a socialist society in which the most important industries and extraction of minerals belonged to the state. Initially, the SDAP was both a reformist and an orthodox had both a reformist and an orthodox Marxist wing. After years of clashes between principled Marxists within the SDAP and SDAP parliamentary group leader Pieter Jellis Troelstra, in which Troelstra and the party board found the sharp tone of the Marxist criticism unacceptable, the editorial staff of the Marxist opposition paper, the Tribune, was expelled by a 2/3 majority at the Party Congress of the 13th to the 14th, February 1909, in Deventer. Some 400 kindred spirits left the SDAP with them. On the 14th of March 1909, they founded the Social Democratic Party. The name social democracy was still used by both types of socialists at that time. The SDAP fought for universal suffrage and social laws such as the state pension. The introduction of universal suffrage in 1917 gave the SDAP a large gain in seats. After the October Revolution had taken place in Russia in 1917 and unrest had begun in Germany, Troelstra believed in 1918 that the time for revolution had also come in the Netherlands. His attempt at revolution, known as Troelstra's mistake, was a great failure. Troelstra was succeeded as party leader in 1925 by Johan Willem Albarda. In the 30s, a rapprochement between the SDAP and the other parties arose, partly because the SDAP gave up its pursuit of general disarmament. In the municipality of Amsterdam, the SDAP had long supplied aldermen, including Mona de Miranda and Fleur Wilbout. In 1937, a new program of principles was drawn up and adopted, which replaced the original party program dating from 1912, which was still strongly influenced by Marxism and which represented a fundamental break with the past. From 1939 onwards, the party participated in the De Geer II cabinet with 2 ministers, Albarda and Jan van den Tempel. In 1940, the SDAP and the party-affiliated newspaper Het Volk were banned by the German occupiers. The Hague's former alderman and later Prime Minister Willem Dries played an important role in the clandestine consultations between the various parties on post-war politics. The newspaper Het Volk was continued after 1945 as the daily Het Vrije Volk. A year later, in 1946, the Labour Party was formed from a merger of the SDAP, the Liberal Democratic League, and the Christian Democratic Union. It says, soon after its foundation in 1894, the SDAP was nicknamed Schoolmasters, Ministers, and Lawyers Party. which addressed the tension between an intellectual party cadre and a popular support base. The upstairs room of Restaurant des Atlas in Zwolle, the founding space of the SDAP, was named after Willem Dries in 2012. Back to the text. Apart from establishing a new line of strategic and tactical demarcation, the SDAP had little immediate impact on the small politically conscious sector of the Dutch working class, which still remained firmly committed to the direct action tactics of the SDB. Except for the diamond cutters, who constituted nearly 3/4 of the Amsterdam membership, the party had almost no base in the urban working class. Paradoxically, the main organizational base of the SDAP was among the tenant farmers and landless laborers of rural Friesland, who had been politicized during the prolonged economic crisis of the 1880s. As late as 1899, the SDAP was still considered predominantly a Friesland movement. Freed from its parliamentary faction, the SDB continued its development toward a form of anarcho-syndicalism. Within a few years, Neuhaus and his followers disdained party organization entirely, dissolved the SDB to regroup in the National Arbeidssecretariat, NAS, National Labor Secretariat, which the SDB had organized in 1893 as a national trade union federation. Dutch Wikipedia says, the National Labor Secretariat was a radical left-wing umbrella organization of Dutch trade unions that existed from 1893 to 1940. It was the first trade union center in Dutch history. The National Labor Secretariat, the NAS, was founded in 1893 at the instigation of the Second International, and later the organization became strongly syndicalist in character. On the 8th of September 1940, the NAS was liquidated by the German occupiers. The number of members was approximately 15,000 in 1894 and fell to 10,000 in 1902. The more moderate counterpart to the NAS was the NVV, which was founded in 1906. In addition to trade unions, the Social Democratic League was also affiliated with the NAS. Later, the SDAP became a member organization, but a few years later only trade unions. The NAS did maintain ties with various parties. Initially, the then SP of Harm Kultek, NAS secretary from 1907 to 1913, was its parliamentary ally, but this party disappeared from the lower house in 1922. In 1923, the NAS's ever-increasing political rapprochement led to a split. The split faction then founded the Dutch Syndicalist Trade Union, which continued to pursue a syndicalist and politically independent line. In this sense, the NSV saw itself as the true heir to the basic principles of the former syndicalist NAS. The CPN took the place of the SP. The NAS and the CPN jointly published the theoretical journal Klassenstrijd. After 1926, the ties between the two organizations were broken by order of the Comintern. The CPN had been ordered by Moscow to push for a merger between the NAS and NVV. In 1927, the year in which Stalin took power, the NAS broke all ties with the Comintern and its trade union branch, the Red Trade Union International. At the same time, the NAS chairman, Henk Snevliet, and other left-wing communists left the CPN. In August 1927, the NAS published a brochure with speeches by the Russian dissidents Trotsky and Zinoviev. From 1929, Snevliet's Revolutionary Socialist Party was the most important ally of the NAS. The break with the RVI gave rise to hope among a section of the NSV for a return to the syndicalist line of the NAS. For this reason, a merger between the two organizations was explored, but this attempt failed. In May 1940, the association was banned by the Germans. The NAS ceased to exist and was not re-established after the war. Back to the text. Through agitation with the NAS-affiliated unions, Neuhaus and his followers attempted to pursue a policy of direct industrial action. For the next 2 decades, they were to remain the most militant and class-conscious sector of the Dutch working class and the main working class competitor of the SDAP. New section. Struggling with ideas. Pannekoek's conversion to Marxism. Although Marxian socialism had little appeal to the Dutch working class during the later part of the 19th century, Marxism did have a lasting imprint on an entire generation of Dutch intellectuals, among them Anton Pannekoek. Born to Johannes Pannekoek and Wilhelmina Dorothea Byns on January 2nd, 1873, the second of 4 children, in the small village of Vassen, located in the poor and backward agricultural province of Gelderland, Pannekoek spent a relatively happy childhood in a rural milieu. Like many other Marxist intellectuals, Pannekoek came from a family upwardly mobile from the lower middle class. By hard work and a self-acquired education, Pannekoek's father rose from a farming background to become a manager of a small foundry. His father, a Calvinist turned freethinker and a supporter of the Liberal Party, was also a man of advanced ideas who made considerable sacrifices to educate his 4 children. From his family, Pannekoek inherited a strong work ethic and a serious devotion to occupation that helped account for his incredible productivity in 2 separate spheres. Like most middle-class Dutch youth of this period, Pannekoek was not of a particularly rebellious nature, and no serious conflicts marked his early years. Only a lame leg acquired in an accident marred an otherwise tranquil childhood and created in Pannekoek a predisposition towards solitude and intellectual activity. When Pannekoek was 12 years old, Pannekoek began to develop a strong interest in nature, particularly in astronomy and botany. Pannekoek had a particular fondness for collecting and classifying wild plants. In high school, his interest in astronomy was further stimulated by his science teacher, J.M. Smit, who helped him to become an accomplished amateur astronomer. As a result of Smith's encouragement, Pannekoek decided to pursue a career in astronomy at the University of Leiden rather than become a high school teacher as he had initially planned. The composite picture, Jesus Christ. The composite picture that emerges from the young Pannekoek is of a modest, sensitive, rather private person, excelling in the sciences, quick at languages, and at the immense task of disciplining himself for self-imposed studies. Even in Pannekoek's youth, the main traits of his intellectual work were present. Pannekoek's reflective and highly rationalistic personality, a capacity for clear writing which rarely needed correction, and a virtually photographic memory made Pannekoek a theorist almost by disposition, who could hardly handle isolated facts without knitting them into a theory. When Pannekoek looked at the world, Pannekoek saw only unity in structure. Pannekoek's entire career, in both politics and astronomy, was to be an effort towards synthesis and system building, which Pannekoek often carried to extreme limits to achieve internal coherence. Quote, "He potters around with a little stick in the drain pipe of theory," end quote, his friend Willem van Ravestein later noted. Let's see if there's anything for this guy. Willem van Ravestein lived from 1876 to 1970 and was a Dutch socialist, later until 1926 communist politician and writer and member of the House of Representatives. Willem van Ravestein married Johanna Wismeyer on the 8th of September 1910, with whom he had a son. He was friends with David Weenkoop and was expelled from the SDP at the so-called Deventer Congress. He was subsequently one of the founders of the SDP and later editor-in-chief of the Tribune from 1916 to 1925, and a member of the House of Representatives from 1918 to 1925. From 1919 to 1927, a member of the Rotterdam City Council. In 1926, he was expelled from the CPH, the predecessor of the CPN. In 1927, he retired from active political life and became a curator of the Rotterdam Municipal Library until his retirement in 1941. He translated books by Honoré de Balzac, among others. Back to the text. Following a long courtship, Pannekoek married Johanna Nasu Noordevier in 1903. A talented musician and a teacher of Dutch literature from a family with deep roots in Dutch intellectual life, Johanna Nasu Noordevier had been one of the first women in the Netherlands to receive a doctorate and was already a convinced socialist by the time she met Pannekoek. Through her, Pannekoek gained entry to literary and artistic circles. In Pannekoek's marriage, which produced 2 children and lasted over 50 years, Pannekoek found a relationship that was at once intellectually, emotionally, and politically satisfying. In his personal life, Pannekoek's revolutionary Marxism was never translated into a commitment against bourgeois society. He valued highly the comforts and tranquility of a middle-class home. Footnote: Pannekoek has provided a revealing glimpse into his lifestyle in a passage in his memoirs. Quote, I remember that Henrietta Rolandhorst recommended to me that the Hotel Frankfurter Hof, because, as she later told me, it had nice flowers in the windows, but after 2 days I left because it was too expensive and too chic. I then went to a People's Hotel the comrades had recommended to me, but it was too crude and too simple. Finally, I went to one of the hotels behind the station catering to commercial travelers, and there I found what I was looking for. End quote. Pannekoek. This document was originally written by Pannekoek as a personal memoir for his family in 1944. End footnote. Pannekoek's life followed an orderly, well-regulated pattern with regular time periods of carefully allotted to various intellectual projects. Like most intellectuals of the Second International, Pannekoek's cultural tastes were conservative and classical. Pannekoek liked essentially the same music, art, and literature as any other fin-de-siècle or turn-of-the-century intellectual. Pannekoek's chief form of recreation involved long, solitary walks in the woods, an activity Pannekoek pursued with great vigor until the end of his life. Throughout his political and scientific career, Pannekoek always combined his visits to distant cities for congresses and lectures with long excursions into the surrounding countryside. Until Pannekoek was 26, Pannekoek conformed successfully to middle-class norms and expectations. At the time, the future seemed to hold for Pannekoek a secure and perhaps distinguished scientific career. Having experienced almost no personal hardship or frustration, Pannekoek had little in the way of a personal sense of alienation. By his own admission, he found the middle-class lifestyle and career opportunities that astronomy offered completely fulfilling and saw little need to look beyond them. Pannekoek's only political activity was as a member of the Liberal Party and chairman of a student debating society. Although Pannekoek was first introduced to the ideas of the left by his high school science teacher J.M. Smith, a friend of Demellet Newhouse, who was later expelled from his teaching position for speaking at a suffrage rally, these ideas had no immediate impact on him. His whole pre-Marxian worldview was built upon his faith in science as the primary instrument for the liberation of humanity and the source of all progress. Pannekoek arrived at the socialist convictions only after an intense intellectual odyssey, or what he termed a, quote, struggle of ideas, end quote. Although Pannekoek's conversion to socialism clearly did not derive from personal contact with the hardships of the workers, it was conditioned in part by a growing political awareness in Dutch intellectual circles about the problems and iniquities in Dutch society during a time of rapid and disruptive social and economic change. For Pannekoek, the road to Marxism began unexpectedly in January 1899 when Pannekoek encountered, in the reading room of the local liberal club, the Leiden tulip grower and ardent socialist Willem de Graaf, who engaged him in a heated argument over the question of socialism. Shortly afterwards, de Graaf gave him a number of books to read on the subject. For the first time, Pannekoek began to grapple intellectually with major social problems, which prompted him to ask, quote, why is it that I cannot participate and find a place in the struggle? While others are actively striving to improve the world, I sit reducing meridian plates. Science can only remain living when it changes men and conditions. Science must help prepare a better future, to enable humanity to become free and happy. End quote. Pannekoek. Footnote. Pannekoek, undated entry, untitled book, Anton Pannekoek, Astronomical Institute, University of Amsterdam. Pannekoek used this notebook to record his thoughts during the years 1899 and 1900. End footnote. The direction in which Pannekoek was moving became apparent in early April when he and his older brother Adolf, a career army officer, began to draw up a plan for a utopian community based on the writings of Louis Blanc. Shortly afterwards, Pannekoek noted that he felt, quote, drawn to the doctrines of a number of largely idealist and utopian thinkers, such as Tolstoy, Kropotkin, Lausset, Thomas à Kempis, the elder Arnold Toynbee, and the Persian Baha'is. Pannekoek's feeling at the time was that, like science, each of these doctrines strived in their own way for a better life. Quote, why is it, Pannekoek asked, quote, that scientific beliefs are considered clearer, higher, and more correct than other beliefs, end quote. Pannekoek. Entry for April 8th, 1899. While each of these doctrines had a side that appealed to Pannekoek, none satisfied Pannekoek completely. For this reason, Pannekoek felt convinced that he was being, quote, driven by fate, end quote, towards social democracy, although Pannekoek admitted it was not clear why. Pannekoek's main objection to social democracy at this point centered around his belief that it fostered a, quote, party spirit and, quote, party hatred. Entry, April 23rd, 1899. The critical turning point in Pannekoek's political development came in early June 1899 when de Graaf gave him a copy of Edward Bellamy's novel Equality. Wikipedia says Equality is a utopian novel by Edward Bellamy and the sequel to Looking Backward, 2000 to 1887. Equality was first published in 1897. Equality contains a minimal amount of plot. Bellamy primarily used Equality to expand on the theories Bellamy first explored in Looking Backward. Equality is now in the public domain and available for free. Equality takes up immediately after the events of Looking Backward with the main characters from the first novel, Julian West, Dr. Leet, and his daughter Edith. Julian West tells his nightmare of return to the 19th century to Edith, who is sympathetic. Julian West's citizenship in the new America is recognized, and he goes to the bank to obtain his own account or, quote, credit card, from which he can draw his equal share of the national product. Julian West learns that Edith and her mother do not normally wear the long skirts he has seen them in. They had been wearing them so as not to offend his 19th century sensibilities. When Julian tells Edith that he would not be shocked to see them dressed in the modern fashion, Edith immediately runs into the house and comes out dressed in a pantsuit. Clothing has revolutionized and is now made of strengthened paper, recycled when dirty, and replaced at very little cost. Shoes and dishes are made of variations on the same substance. Julian learns that women are free to compete in many of the same trends as men. The manager of the paper factory he visits with Edith is a woman. Edith herself is in the second year of the 3-year general labor period required of everyone before choosing a trade, but has taken leave to spend time with Julian. The two tour a tenement house in which no one now lives, kept as a reminder of the evils of private capitalism. Julian opens his safe, a device unknown in 2000 outside museums. Dr. Leet sees his mortgages and securities not as long obsolete claims to ownership, interest in things, but rather in people and their labor. The papers are worthless except as antiques, as most papers of the sort were burned at the conclusion of the economic transition in a great blaze on the former site of the New York Stock Exchange. The gold coins in the safe are admired for their prettiness, but are also worthless. Julian learns more about the world of the year 2000. Handwriting has been virtually replaced by phonograph records, and jewelry is no longer used since jewels are now worthless. Julian is amazed by a television-like device called the electroscope. World communication is simplified, since everyone now speaks a universal language in addition to their native tongue. Not only are there motor cars, but also private air cars. Everyone is now vegetarian, and the thought of eating meat is looked upon with revulsion. The book concludes with an almost uninterrupted series of lectures from Dr. Leet and other characters, mostly concerning how the idyllic state in which West has arrived was achieved. As might be expected given the success of Looking Backwards, Equality was highly anticipated. A large first edition was ordered by the publishers. In spite of this, the first edition entirely sold out within 36 hours of publication. Ripley Hitchcock, who was affiliated with Bellamy's publishers, explained the thematic distinction between Looking Backward and Equality, as Equality, quote, explains not only the institution of Bellamy's futures, righteousness and reason, but likewise the course of historical evolution by which they were born out of the very different order of things existing today, end quote. Reaction to Equality was generally not good. Nicholas P. Gilman provides a common criticism for the work in his review for the Quarterly Journal of Economics. Written in 1897, Gilman explains, quote, Mr. Bellamy has apparently abandoned fiction, and has at length broken the silence of several years of the volume which is neither novel nor a treatise on socialism in scientific form, but a prolonged reduplication of the monologues of Dr. Leet, the part of Looking Backward which is the least interest for most of its readers, end quote. On the other hand, John Dewey called Bellamy a, quote, great American prophet, end quote, preferred Equality, considering Equality to be, quote, more populist and democratic, end quote, than the, quote, more popular and authoritarian, end quote, looking backward. Peter Kropotkin also received the book more favorably, arguing that it was superior to looking backward because Bellamy had removed the authoritarian aspects. Kropotkin claimed that these elements did not fit the character of the former work in any case, and stated that he believed that if someone suitable could have conversed with Bellamy, they could have convinced Bellamy to declare for anarchism. Back to the text. The effect of this American utopian novel, Pannekoek later noted, quote, was as if a blindfold had been removed, ... For the first time it dawned on me that all theories have a social basis and significance and develop in response to real material interests rather than abstract reasoning, end quote. Pannekoek. In Bellamy's Equality, Pannekoek found many of the themes that would come to dominate his Marxism. Bellamy, in the course of describing a hypothetical egalitarian society, sought at the same time to identify the main obstacles to the egalitarian society's realization. Bellamy argued that the fundamental cause of class domination was the continued predominance of the, quote, false teachings of the dominant class and the lack of class consciousness on the part of the masses. He felt, therefore, that the primary task of a revolutionary movement was to assault the doctrines of the old order by a, quote, diffusion of knowledge among the masses, end quote. Edward Bellamy, Equality. Before a revolution could begin, Bellamy argued, it, quote, must accumulate tremendous moral force and overwhelming weight of justification, end quote. Bellamy. Following his reading of Bellamy, Pannekoek declared that his entire outlook had been, quote, totally changed, end quote. Quote, now I know for the first time what the Social Democrats want and predict. Their beliefs are my beliefs and their aspirations my aspirations, end quote. Pannekoek. Pannekoek Untitled Book, entry for June 11th, 1899. Although Marxism provided Pannekoek with a new explanation of social reality, Marxism did not mesh well with either his career in astronomy or his standing among the light and middle class. For this reason, Pannekoek was first reluctant to make his newly found socialist convictions known publicly. During the July 1899 municipal elections, Pannekoek continued to work for the Liberal Party. Following several further months of hesitation, Pannekoek finally announced his changed political perspective in mid-November at a Liberal-sponsored meeting on educational legislation when, to the surprise and disapproval of audience, he gave an address favorable to the socialist viewpoint. Once begun, Pannekoek's political development was rapid and purposeful. Under de Graaf's tutelage, Pannekoek began to digest the socialist classics. Within a few weeks, Pannekoek felt confident enough in his understanding of Marxism to write a short article enunciating the issue that was to predominate his theoretical work for the next 60 years, the relationship of ideas and thought to social development. Several months later, Pannekoek wrote another short article adding his comments to a lengthy debate that had been going on in the independent leftist review De Concreek between Frank van der Hoos and P.L. Tak over the nature of surplus value. This looks like what is being referred to is a Peter Lodewijk Tak. And it says Peter Lodewijk Tak lived from 1848 to 1907, was a Dutch journalist and politician. Peter Lodewijk Tak was the son of a steward in Middelburg, where he started writing foreign reviews for the Middelburgische Courant after failing his law studies in 1878. He was friends with Fleur Wieboud, who like him, was a member of the Societeit Sint-Joris. Both Middelburgers moved to the capital, Tak, in 1882. He wrote there for the De Amsterdammer and De Nieuwe Gids. Peter Lodewijk Tak took over the financial management of the later magazine from Frank van der Hoos. After a quarrel, he started his own literary magazine, De Kan Kriek. Tak was initially a left liberal supporter of the Troib. In 1899, Tak became a member of the SDAP and he went to work for Het Volk. Tak became editor-in-chief of the Socialist Party newspaper in 1903 after the party board dismissed Peter Jellis Troelstra from his position. In 1905, Tak dismissed the journalist Jacob Israel de Haan after the publication of his novel Piep Polintis. The homosexual tendency in the book was unacceptable to Tak. Tak did, however, strongly advocate women's rights. From 1905 until Tak's early death, Tak was also party chairman, member of the Parliament for the Franeker constituency, member of the Provincial States and Municipal Council of Amsterdam. P.L. Tak founded the housing association Die Dageraad in 1901. This corporation named a complex of houses in Amsterdam Zuid in the 1920s after its founder. The housing complex is famous for its beautiful architecture in the style of the Amsterdam School. He died in 1907 during a holiday on the Dwinvliet estate near Domburg from a heart attack. Back to the text. Pannekoek's theoretical ability immediately caught the attention of Van der Hoos, who suggested that Pannekoek join him in an extended study of Marxist economics. Through his collaboration with Van der Hoos, Pannekoek established regular contact with most of the leading figures of Dutch social democracy and acquired many of the intellectual skills necessary for his own emergence as a major theoretician of Dutch Marxism. New section. Rank-and-file militant, Pannekoek and the SDAP in Leiden. Although Pannekoek came to socialism by an intellectual route, Pannekoek was not content to confine himself solely to theoretical activity. From 1899 until Pannekoek's departure for Germany in 1906, Pannekoek was totally immersed in the socialist movement in Leiden, and these experiences provided a critical reference point for his thought. Pannekoek's activities during these years were not unlike those of many other working-class militants involved in the daily life of social democracy. Shortly after he announced his conversion to socialism, Pannekoek joined de Graaf in an attempt to organize an SDAP section in Leiden. Despite an extensive propaganda campaign at Pannekoek's and de Graaf's expense, only 20 persons were present for the initial meeting in a room designed for 150. Of these, less than half decided to affiliate with the SDAP. Like the SDAP itself, the Leiden section took root only slowly and precariously. Although a modest industrial city of 55,000 and a textile center since the Middle Ages, Leiden was characterized by an outmoded and declining industrial base, and a workforce that was impoverished and demoralized even by Dutch standards. Footnote. Socioeconomic conditions in Leiden and the state of the city's working class are described and analyzed at length in the January 24th, 1903 issue of De Wekker. End footnote. These conditions were a reflection, at least in part, in the absence of a trade union movement of any sizable dimensions. In these circumstances, only a handful of Leiden's workers affiliated with the SDAP. In 1900, after a year of intense organizing, membership stood at only 13. By 1901, it increased to 21, and by 1903 to 29. Of these members, the overwhelming majority were artisans and small tradesmen. Footnote: an occupational listing from the early 1900s lists members in the following trades: cigar makers, 2; shoemakers, 2; typographers, 1; house painters, 4; blacksmiths, 4; plasterers, 4; guards, 3; masons, 2; bricklayers, 5; carpenters, 6; weavers, 1; bakers, 1; paperhangers, 1. Undated membership listing attached to something in Dutch. 1899 to 1903, SDAP Leiden Archives. End footnote. Despite a full-time commitment to astronomy, Pannekoek made his presence felt in virtually all sectors of party activity. Indeed, it might be said that Pannekoek was the moving force within the small Leiden section. At various times, Pannekoek served as chairman, secretary, treasurer, and editor of the local weekly, De Wekker. Pannekoek's influence within the Leiden SDAP rested in part on the trust the members extended to Pannekoek for his hard work in keeping the section alive, and in part on the qualities of Pannekoek's own personality: his equanimity, honesty, lack of desire for power, and intense dedication. Pannekoek enjoyed the sense of camaraderie that the section provided and relished the long, informal discussions. Pannekoek's ability to speak to the workers on their own level made Pannekoek personally popular with both the party rank and file and the local working class. Over the next few years, Pannekoek participated in a variety of political, economic, and educational activities intended to strengthen the power of the local working class, which honed his skills as an organizer. Shortly after Pannekoek was elected chairman in February 1900, the Leiden SDAP established as a first step towards politicizing the working class a League for Universal Suffrage with Pannekoek as general secretary. A more important achievement came a month later when the party created, on Pannekoek's initiative, a steering committee to coordinate local working class trade union, political, cultural, and economic activities. Under the chairmanship of Pannekoek, this committee played a vital role in building a permanent trade union movement in Leiden and in organizing support activity for local strikes of textile and metal workers. In his activity on this committee, Pannekoek's overriding concern was with creating a new type of trade union publication, which would seek to develop socialist consciousness within the working class by providing a forum for the workers to write about conditions in the local factories. Pannekoek thought that providing a means for the workers to articulate and attempt to understand their most immediate experiences, such a publication could help to foster a long, slow conceptual process of development that would ultimately culminate in socialist consciousness. That's very interesting because this is going to be very important. This kind of like documentation, direct documentation of like workers' experience, is going to become very important for groups such as Socialism ou Barbarie in France, the Johnson Forest tendency in the United States, as well as operaist movement or tendency within Italy. So this kind of like the workers' inquiry becoming a very like important topic. So it's very interesting that this is important for Pannekoek all the way in early turn of the century. And it's one of the things, actually, it's kind of funny because I'm thinking about the book that I'm also kind of sort of reading at this time, Class Struggle and Capitalism in the USSR, or whatever it's called, by Neil C. Fernandez. And he kind of talks about how like a lot of like the innovations and kind of like the particular perspectives that are usually attributed to like autonomia, autonomist Marxist politics in Italy could be found earlier in the council communist tradition. Which again is interesting. On an economic level, the SDAP sought at Pannekoek's behest to practice a form of anti-capitalist economics by establishing a cooperative bakery. Once again, Pannekoek played a central role by serving on the board of directors, advancing a substantial loan, and on many occasions working late nights in the bakery. That's cool. That's interesting. Although soft-spoken and lacking in histrionic gifts, Pannekoek also distinguished himself as a lively polemicist and orator by championing the cause of Marxism and Leiden in numerous public forums, courses, and debates. In this activity, Pannekoek's constant preoccupation was with developing a Marxist pedagogy grounded in the praxis of everyday life. Pannekoek sought to experiment with a variety of educational techniques intended to make Marxist theory comprehensible to the workers in such a way that they could use it to gain a conscious understanding of their actions. Education from Pannekoek's standpoint was conceived as a means of initiating a mass transformation of consciousness by elaborating and transforming basic conceptions perceived in the daily lives of the workers. Pannekoek saw it as a process leading from simple common sense to systematic and coherent thought. Pannekoek began his educational work in the fall of 1899 with a popularized course on Marxist theory and soon expanded it to other courses. Several years later, Pannekoek's course became the nucleus of a, quote, development club, which aimed at bridging the gap between theory and practice by studies centered around various types of practical activities. Pannekoek's educational work was supplemented by a library and cultural center Pannekoek organized to help raise the cultural level of the local working class. To help combat what Pannekoek felt was one of the leading barriers to class consciousness and moral development, Pannekoek also initiated a propaganda campaign against alcohol abuse. It's very interesting, just because personally for me, because I've always been a sober person. I always thought that obviously there's a lot of variety between abuse and just use, right, of alcohol. But it was interesting, like, the older I've gotten, how important, like, this kind of, like, the critique of drug abuse, or alcohol abuse mostly, is important for, like, people in the radical left. On the one hand, I suppose it can take a kind of, like, puritanical form. On the other hand, I think it's interesting that you can just find it within, like, very, like, libertarian groups, right? So if you watch, like, documentaries on the Spanish Civil War, they talk about how they tried to, like, curb vice, not in, like, an authoritarian way, but kind of, like, tried to be, like, promote sobriety and I don't know. It's very interesting. I don't really know how to feel about it, but it's just personally interesting to me. For Pannekoek, the early years of socialist militancy in Leiden were not easy. His intensive efforts made virtually no headway in radicalizing the local working class. The handful of individuals who composed the small section found themselves either repudiated or ignored by the workers. But for the future development of Pannekoek's thought, however, these experiences provided one of the key prisms through which he was to view the main problems of socialist transformation. It meant that during his most formative period, Pannekoek's Marxism was nurtured in a setting where historical conditions placed the question of class consciousness and ideological development uppermost in Pannekoek's mind. As Pannekoek noted in an analysis of the situation in Leiden at the time, quote, "The future belongs to the workers. Most of them still do not know it," end quote. Pannekoek. That's the end of this chapter. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for letting me look all those things up that I wanted to look up. I think it kind of provides, like, a kind of richer picture and kind of, like, keeps some of the information from going in one ear and out the other by looking up the particular names and concepts that are referenced. So thank you.